And welcome back to the Cover 3 Takeover here on CBS Sports HQ. That's Tom Fornelli. That's Josh Pate coming to us live from Knoxville, Tennessee. And yes, we are counting down until that SEC on CBS game of the week. Tennessee at home, Florida in town. Josh, I want to start with you. You are there, amidst the Vol Navy. You are not far from Calhoun's. You are right there where all of the pregame talk, all of the pregame tension, if there is any, is certainly focused on what's going to happen Saturday. What vibe have you gotten from Knoxville so far?
Yeah, you can almost taste the daiquiris over our shoulder here. That's how close we are to the Vol Navy. Tennessee River right behind us. I really appreciated your intro there. There was a lot of references to blood and violence. It was as aggressive as I've ever heard you. But it's apropos, because when you look at 16 of the last 17 in this rivalry, and yet you kind of juxtapose that to a lot of the hype around this Tennessee team, a 10.5-point line, and it's floated around there all week, which we'll get into momentarily. It's so interesting because the feel around here is, how do we screw this up? How do we fumble this? And that's the older Tennessee generation. The younger Tennessee generation, the ones that have their driver's licenses already, yet still cannot remember when this was a national prime rivalry. They said, how early are we going to be able to run it up here? So there is a large line in the sand, so to speak, between the more seasoned Tennessee fan versus the more green Tennessee fan.
When we do look at that series, how much do you think that 16 out of 17, 5 straight losses, how much impact does that have on these rosters? I mean, Josh, I guess Josh versus Tom follow, how much of that goes into your expectations for what's actually going to play out on the field?
I don't hardly ever care about that stuff. And there is maybe a small exception here just because of the familiarity. They play every year, yada, yada, yada. But more so than anything, I look back at Tennessee versus Pitt a couple of weeks ago. Tennessee was favored in that game. Tennessee had several noteworthy edges in that game, and yet they did everything they could, mistake-wise, to hand the game to Pitt. And if this one goes sideways for them, I personally don't expect to be standing on the field across the river here tomorrow afternoon saying, wow, Tennessee just really got too wrapped up into that 16 out of the last 17. What it would probably be is, wow, Florida's corners really came to play. Wow, Florida's run game really took over. Anthony Richardson, hey, good for him for channeling whatever he could in this game. That's the kind of talk I think we would be trafficking in. And then to put a nice bow on it, if the upset were to happen, you would be saying, look at that, 17 out of 18 after all. I know it's a good talking point. I think there's a lot that goes on in 4 quarters that has a lot more to do with the outcome than just, what looks nice and pretty in a headline.
The series, the streak of the series going Florida's way goes back a lot longer. We've mentioned they've won 5 in a row. We've mentioned the 17 of the last 18. But Chip, in your introduction, you mentioned that this rivalry once again became an annual affair starting in 1990, which is also the first year that Steve Spurrier showed up in Gainesville. And as Spurrier once famously said, you can't spell citrus without UT because Florida dominated the rivalry, sending Tennessee to the Citrus Bowl while Florida was normally going to the Sugar Bowl. Since 1990, Florida has won 25 of the 32 meetings. It hasn't just been a recent thing. But as far as your question of what kind of impact will it have on this week's game, I'm with Josh. I don't think it's really going to mean too much because if you look at these two programs right now, Josh Heupel's in his second season at Tennessee. Billy Napier's in his first season at Florida. These players that are on these rosters haven't really been a part of that long-standing Florida history, and Tennessee is favored in this one. So I think that come Saturday, I think Tennessee is the better team. I think Tennessee's probably going to win, and I don't think the history is going to have any say in it. That said, as far as the psyche of the fans, I think most Vols fans will not believe it until they see it. So that's how it's going to go for them.
All right, well, let's take this onto the field to the people that will have an impact in what's going to happen. Tom, we've got some player props coming up in just a little bit for both of these quarterbacks. But first, generally, what have you seen from Hendon Hooker, someone who did not fully have control of the QB1 duties last season, took control of them, and is now really starting to flex a mastery of this Josh Heupel offense? What has stood out to you about his performance so far in 2022?
Oh, his decision making. Like the key to Josh Heupel's offense is it limits the plays most of the time to half the field, Quarterback has one read, maybe two, but it's not what the genius of Hendon doing in this offense is he's making the read quickly. He realizes when it's not there, and when it's not, he's moving on to the second read and he's processing very fast and he's getting the ball out of the pocket into his receiver's hands, usually in space, and his accuracy, not just in the completion percentage aspect of it, but placing the ball where you need to in relation to where the defender is, where his receiver's going, hitting them in stride, hitting them in a catchable spot, just keeps this offense going, and he's mastered it, and he's really just kind of conducting a beautiful symphony with this Vols offense that has him putting up the kind of numbers in a team that if they keep winning, Hendon Hooker is going to be in the Heisman conversation before the season ends if he keeps playing the way he has played since he took over the starting role last season.
Chip, when we were in Atlanta for SEC Media Days, we had Hendon Hooker roll in there, and what he said about this kind of echoes what Tom just said in the present, and because he used a word that not many players use at media days, and that is fluidity. When he was asked, what will stand out year one to year two, what kind of advantage will you have in the second year, he said fluidity. And that goes back to what Tom just said. There's a lot that I knew about the offense last year, but it takes a lot of repetition. It takes some familiarity before it can just boom, boom, boom on your TV screen like it's supposed to, quote unquote. And you're starting to see glimpses of that. And if you talk to people close to the Tennessee program, they'll tell you, yeah, we're kind of happy with where we are right now, but they feel like there are so many elements still to be incorporated. They feel like there's a level of production, I guess I should say, that they haven't really achieved yet. And when they unlock that, they of course hope it would be in a game like this, but when they unlock that, that's the kind of team that goes from being an early season good story to being a mid-season, ooh, we need to take them seriously, to being early November, wow, they're still here. Like, we got to take them ultra serious now. We have to start talking about them in conversations that we haven't talked about them in a long time. That could include team-wise. That could also include, like Tom said, the Heisman Trophy conversation.
Well, Tom did mention that Heisman Trophy conversation. How about a chance that we can make a little money right now on Saturday? Let's go Hendon Hooker player props. Now, on the season, Hooker's averaging a little bit north of 281 yards per game. Our number here against Florida is 266.5 yards. Josh, are you going over or under?
Okay, so I just sang his praises, so I could just steadily take the under here. The way that I think a lot of folks have envisioned this game playing out is like a pinball game. It's just you visualize the video game scenario. The video game scenario has him over this early third quarter. And I acknowledge that that's on the table. But I also acknowledge that a lot of what Tennessee talks about not quite clicking yet is the ground game. And a lot of what could get them in trouble in this game involves them putting the ball in the air because, to be frank, some of Florida's best opportunities to score may come with their secondary, with their defense on the field. And so especially if they grab an early lead, I actually think that they'll run tempo. They want to run as many plays per minute as any team in the country. They did last year. They want to do it again this year. I just think they'll be a whole lot more balanced in terms of play calling and a whole lot more balanced in terms of incorporating their run game through varying degrees than some expect. I think some just expect an air show, and I don't know if we're going to get that. Now, here's what completely blows this theory up. If they do incorporate the backs, it's just in the passing game, and they rip a couple off for 60 yards after catch, and then I'm sitting there saying, why in the world did I lean under? Why? But I'm going to lean under anyway.
I'll tell you why you're leaning under, because it's the right side to be on. We can gas up Hendon Hooker all we want, and we should, because he's very good. But just the way this game is going to go, the game flow and the game plan, as Josh mentioned, you look at this Florida defense, it has been much better against the pass than it has been the run, and Tennessee has struggled to get its run game going. This is the perfect opportunity for them to do so, because so far this year, this Florida defense is allowing 2.7 yards per carry before contact. That ranks 123rd in the nation. If you break it down to their EPA per rush against, they also rank 123rd in the nation. If the Vols want to get their run game going, this is the perfect opportunity to do so, and I think that is going to be the game plan. And I also think on the other side of the ball, Florida does not want that Tennessee offense on the field for 80 to 90 plays. We're probably going to see a game plan from Florida that tries to limit the amount of time and possessions that Tennessee gets. So when I add all that together, I think Hendon Hooker is going to have a really good game. I just don't think he's going to have that kind of yardage total. So I'm going under the 266.5.
Yeah, line too little. Give me an over. If he has 250 yards, we're looking up and we're being like, what went wrong with Hendon Hooker? No, I look. I don't see 315. I don't see anything crazy. So I generally agree with what you say. But if we're keeping records here, then put me down for an over. All right. What about the other quarterback? Because Anthony Richardson, 3 rushing touchdowns in that very first game. But in the 2 games that have followed, the loss to Kentucky and the upset scare against USF, the accuracy has not been great. Billy Napier himself talking about where they need to improve in the throwing game. We have also seen 4 interceptions, 2 in each of the last 2 games, 0 touchdowns. Tom, what can Anthony Richardson do to get back on track? Do you see that happening here against Tennessee?
I think he needs his offensive play callers and coaches to help him get back on track because I think he needs a little bit of a confidence boost. We saw in that very first game against Utah where he balled out and made some spectacular plays, and all of a sudden they're drawing comparisons to Cam Newton and Vince Young, and he is a highly rated recruit coming out of Gainesville as a high schooler, but he's also still an inexperienced player who has been uneven. We saw it all last year when he couldn't really win the starting job from Emory Jones, and I think that Utah game kind of raised expectations. So if I'm Florida and I'm going into this game as an underdog, like I said, I want to limit possessions. I want to get my run game going. I want to make life as easy as possible on Anthony Richardson. I want to include him in that run game. And then if he can start feeling himself a little bit that way, then you start opening up lanes in the passing game, and then maybe you start finding some success through the air, which will only improve his confidence further. So I think that's going to be the game plan for the Gators, and I think that's what they have to do because Anthony Richardson is a very talented player, and as long as you let him stick to doing the things he's good at, he's going to have a good game.
There is a certain mock draft circulating the mock community, and I will not be the guy who singles out whomst that is, but said person put this young man in the first round after week 1, and said person doesn't even feature this young man after week 3. So I'm not sure how the NFL draft actually works, but that seems pretty extreme. It goes back to what Tom just said, and it goes back to what Florida folks were saying about their program even during fall camp. They thought their offensive line was a relative strength of the team. Check. That's validated. That's true. They thought their running back committee, they thought their entire room, that unit, would be a strength of this team. Now, it is my opinion that that's also true, and there are a number of ways that you can feature those guys. It doesn't just have to be halfback dives and ISOs all afternoon, but that's how you instill confidence in Anthony Richardson. Imagine if tomorrow afternoon Florida takes an early 10-0 lead and Anthony Richardson has thrown the ball 3 or 4 times, and he looks around and the dust is kind of settled. You've worked through the early storm and script and whatnot. And he says, wait, I don't have to do it all. The magazines and the headlines were wrong about that. Wow, we could actually win this. I could roll with this. I could vibe with this. They are not without the ability to do that. They are not without the skill to do that. It doesn't have to be, contrary to some opinions out there, Anthony Richardson just tossing this entire team on his back. He has that ability, but it's got to be in a complimentary fashion, and it has not been that the last 2 weeks.
All right, time for game picks. Again, Florida finds itself as a 10.5-point underdog on the road, over under of 62.5. Josh, you first. What is your best bet for this game?
I rolled with Tennessee. I laid the points, but at the same time, I totally echo what Tom said about the overall gameplay, the overall style of play that we're probably going to see unfold. The last time I was in this building, I saw Tennessee versus Ole Miss. And the thought was we may hit triple digits that evening. And we didn't. We had a lot of trash, mustard bottles, golf balls, etc. But what we did not have is a ton of scoring because the actual gameplay dictated another total. And I think this game tomorrow may be the same way. And I actually think if Tennessee incorporates a game plan that is best suited for them to cover this 10.5-point line, which I think they will, it also correlates with an under. So I'll take Tennessee laying the points. I also think at 62.5, really anything that's north of 61, I like the under on.
Yeah, I'm taking the under. As I've said, I think Florida's best shot at winning this game is keeping Tennessee's offense off the field as much as possible. And that means they're going to be getting behind that offensive line, using their stable of running backs, using Anthony Richardson in the run game, keep the clock going, put together long drives, try to break off some explosive runs to help get yourself into scoring position and finish drives. And on the other side, as I mentioned, I think that if you look at Florida's defense, they're much weaker against the run than they have been against the pass. So if you're Tennessee, you're probably going to be seeing the Vols run the ball a lot more often than we've seen them do so in their first 3 games. So I don't see a lot of clock stoppages in this one, except for after first downs late in the halves. I think they're going to see fewer possessions than expected and fewer plays than expected. And when that's the case, it usually leads to fewer points than expected, too.
UNITY, UNITY, drop that confetti, cue that Latifah. Yes, we are taking the under in the one game that Tennessee has played this year against a team with a pulse, a team that has cornerbacks that can match up man-to-man against those Tennessee wide receivers. Tennessee did not hit 30 in regulation. This is going to be tougher against Florida than it was against Akron. Newsflash. So I think we do see Florida in an effort to keep this thing close, try to run the ball behind that great offensive line. I do see less possessions for Tennessee. The clock continues to move, and we go under. Love it when we're all in line here. Love it when we can give it to you here on CBS Sports HQ. He is Josh Pate. You can follow him, all of his action from Knoxville on CBS Sports HQ, and you can check out The Late Kick with Josh Pate Tuesdays, Thursdays, Sundays, 8 p.m. live on YouTube and Facebook.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.